This is a lecture for History 122, World Civilizations from 1600. I call this section 0 because this is basically kind of background information that's going to help us better understand what this course is about. In particular, you may ask, how is it possible in a single course to cover all world civilizations from the year 1600? Right? That would be very difficult to do, especially if you look at some of the courses I teach. For example, I teach a course on the history of modern China in just one semester, the history of modern Japan in one semester. So how can we talk about teaching a course that's going to cover the whole world when I can fill up an entire course on just one country? And the answer is we're not going to do that, right? In World Civilizations, the purpose is not to tell the story of the entire world in a sense of every single country in the world, but we are telling a story about the world itself and its history, even though we're not talking about every single country. So I need to kind of give you a roadmap to kind of tell you where we're going and what we're going to be doing. And broadly speaking, we could divide this course into 5 sections, right? In the first section, which is basically sections 1 and 2, we're going to emphasize how early in this time period, particularly around the 1500s leading up into 1600, the West, meaning Europe, and of course later on that will include the United States, is not the most powerful advanced part of the world, right? If you wanted to go to the most powerful advanced part of the world in the year 1600 or before that, you would either go to some of the countries in Islamic civilization or in East Asian civilization. And so the second part of this class will explain then, how is it that the West is able to rise to power and by the 19th century become dominant in the world when it started off several centuries before that behind, right? Why is it that when we start this class in the year 1600, it's the Islamic and East Asian civilizations that are so powerful, but they will be both outstripped and then in many places conquered by the West by the 19th century? How does the West become so powerful? In the third section, we will then try and understand how the West's rise to power is going to affect other countries, and principally that's going to be looking at the rise of Western imperialism. In the next section, we're going to be looking at more focused on the 20th century. How is the power of the West, particularly Western Europe, diminished, and what replaces it? And that's where it kind of leads into the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the challenges the world faces today, right? So that's kind of the roadmap. That's kind of the outline of what our course is going to be looking at. And part of this course is also trying to deal with this kind of basic question. And that's how things have changed so much since before the year 1600 compared to today, right? So a big part of this course is this. Generally, people before the year 1600 did not get enough food to eat, right? Malnourishment was common. And sometime in someone's life, there was probably going to be a good chance that they were going to endure a famine when they quite simply wouldn't get enough food to eat. And even when things were relatively good, they may not have much food to eat. Generally, people before the year 1600 did not have much clothing, right? They would maybe only have a couple sets of clothes if they were lucky, if they were your average person. They typically lived in housing that provided little protection from the elements or privacy, right? So for example, I often will talk when I teach in History 121 about roof tiles, how people used to live in houses with thatch, which is kind of straw as their roof. And the problem with that is that rain drips through it and rats and other small animals live in thatch and they like fall on you while you're sleeping, right? And that was quite common before the year 1600s, that people lived in houses with leaky roofs and they lived in houses with lots of rats and other things. And they lived in houses that sometimes only consisted of a single room and so didn't have privacy. Generally, before the year 1600, people did not travel far from home or faster than a person on foot or a horse could go, right? So you were very limited in how fast you could go. And because of the limits on speed, you probably weren't going to travel very far from home anyway. If you were born before the year 1600, you would have had a good chance of dying early from accident, from disease, or from war. And we talk today how it's a great tragedy when a young person dies, especially a child. And it was, of course, a great tragedy in the past, but it was a tragedy that happened very often, right? It was normal in the before the year 1600 that if you were a parent, you would have lost one or more children before they grew up, right? One thing is, and speaking as a parent, I want to die before my children. I don't want to see any of my children die. That would have been common in the past, especially infant mortality was very high. You would have had probably a brother or sister die. That was common. And you most likely would have had very few political rights before the year 1600. So our class begins at a time when people had a lot of difficulties, when their material lives were very poor, when they had little freedom, and probably did not live very long. Right? That's kind of how our class starts. But when our class ends, things are very different. Today, people have more than enough food to eat. Our problem tends to be not so much, for most people, getting enough food to eat. Our problem is we may tend to eat too much, or we eat the wrong kind of food. We now have a lot of clothes, right? People generally can go for weeks sometimes without wearing the same clothes twice. Clothes are often very inexpensive. Not only do we live in homes that have our own room, or sometimes we have more rooms that are ours, we also have climate control, right? You don't like the temperature, you can turn a dial and the temperature will change almost instantly to one that you find comfortable. We have access to travel by car, train, or plane, right? Most of you probably own a car allowing you to travel at speeds that would have been unimaginable to someone living in the year 1600. And what I think is particularly striking is if you wanted to, if you had the money, you could get on a plane and fly hundreds or thousands of miles away, right? You can get to the other side of the world for a comparatively low price. It's safe, and it will take only about a day or so. And that's in reach of many people. Very few people will die early from accident, from disease, or war today, especially in countries like the United States. And when a young person dies, it's a tragedy, but it's a rare one compared to the past. And of course, we enjoy a significant amount of political rights. If you're a citizen of the United States, you have the Bill of Rights to protect you. You have freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, lots of rights that people in the year 1600 would not have had. And of course, you get to vote to help decide who will govern our country. So a large part of this class is also trying to explain how did we get this situation from the situation in the year 1600 when people lacked freedom, lacked a lot of material goods, to a situation today where people often have a good amount of political and social freedom, and we enjoy a lot of material goods. Right? A big part of this course is trying to understand how that happened. And it's very much closely connected to this question of why did the West become so powerful? Right? These questions are related, and it's something that we will be exploring as this class goes on.